Chapter 3 Church Bells. Samuel. They always said that she was a Blackfoot daisy, a free spirit, that she grew up wild. Her blonde hair was always down, never pulled up or restrained in any way. It made her more beautiful than any flower in the field. She lived in a little shack with a little blue tick hound. I used to come out to that little dog, chained on the porch. I'd come over and give her a little treat and pat her on the head, tousling her floppy little ears. Jenny and her four little siblings were always running around that yard. She'd smile at me, maybe a little wave, before chasing one of those little ones to catch for whatever reason they were running away from. I lived next to them my whole childhood, only moving away when I left for law school. They didn't have much, but goodness, was that girl blessed with beauty. We didn't have much either, and I knew I would never be good enough for her. I would catch myself staring at her reading on the front porch, her little dog at her feet. She'd look up from a book and catch me, going back to her novel, pretending she didn't, and I would run off to my job down the street, to the little hardware shop. Her kind of beauty was the kind that someone with a lot of cash wouldn't be able to turn down. Ransom was a construction worker who built his business from the ground up. His daddy was an oil man. One night at the bar, Maloney's, a little country bar in Delhi, he had completed a job and needed a quick place to relax after the job. Sure, it was a little run-down, not his typical place of business, but oh, was he glad he did. She was dancing with her friends one summer night, wearing a little dime store dress. So, you can put two and two together. She had the looks, he had the mansion, you can figure out the rest. His next project was building his own home, in that little town of Delhi, where nothing happens. But the town was buzzing with the news that this man found a little property to build his own mansion, out of place from the rest of the town. Shortly after she was dripping in diamonds, she'd bring the finest champagne at any of the local get-togethers. It felt like my eyesight had turned green. He was always sending her roses. That dime store dress went away, replaced with a fancy, brilliant white dress. I miss that dime store dress. How it was just draped over her hips. She was all uptown now, and one day she came home with a huge diamond ring, sparkling off her finger, ready to take his last name. My breath caught in my chest as she showed me one morning I was heading to work. I was struggling to keep where to go to school, loving this town, but I was accepted to the most prestigious law school after completing my bachelor's at Mount St. Joseph University. Now I didn't have a reason to stay. She used to tell me she'd love to hear the church bells ringing down the street, a tiny little red brick church, to hear Dottie People's song, "It's All Gonna Be All Right," at lunch was something she would never let leave her heart. I looked over one day, where I had been seeing her before, sitting on those porch steps, listening to the bells ringing. She used to tell me that she loved to hear the church bells ringing down the street, a tiny little red brick church. To hear Dottie People's song, "It's All Gonna Be All Right," at lunch was something she would never let leave her heart. I looked over one day, where I had seen her before, sitting on those porch steps, listening to the bells ringing. But she had already left. I shed a tear as the same church bells rang out. I was heading down the street to watch as she slipped out of my fingers. That song started to play on those church bells. I walked up, and ushers opened the double doors of the sanctuary. I took a seat near the middle, on the left, farthest spot I could find where I wouldn't have to watch her walk up that aisle, each step taking a step further away from my heart. The choir began to sing as she walked down the aisle. Their voices came flowing down from the loft. Even though I was mixed in the crowd, she found me. She could always find me in a crowd. She smiled. But then she closed her eyes, folded her hands as she was handed her bouquet. Her mother walked her down the aisle, something truly beautiful. Miss Collins whispered in her ear, "It's all going to be all right." And I could tell she was just listening to those church bells ringing. After that, I don't think I saw her very often. Everyone in town would always refer to them as Ken and Barbie. Fake as plastic. Fake like her polyester hair. But Jenny could care less. Or at least that's what she acted like. But I knew her better. She was hosting her junior league parties. Girls only came because they wanted to see a glimpse inside their home, to find the cracks. Oh, was she good at hiding the cracks. Jenny and Ransom would always be found at the local country club. but something she would never reveal was what went on behind those closed doors at home. I received a text from her one day. "Hey, let's get coffee," heartbeat song. Ever since our dance by the creek years ago, she always called me her heartbeat song. My last message from her was from 5 months earlier. Maybe she heard I was heading back to Connecticut. We met at our favorite coffee shop when we were in high school. Best place to study. Free of screaming 4 and 5-year-olds. Delhi Perk. As I walked in, I could see all the bruises. She could always find me in a crowd, and I could always see through her mask. No matter how much makeup she tried to cover them up with, I could tell. Even with her dark sunglasses, I could see the pain behind her eyes. She found my eyes as the door rang as I entered, and her eyes filled with tears. I sat, and she talked. He came home every night drunk. Saturdays were the worst. He'd come home each night ready to fight. Didn't matter if the dinner was late, if the house wasn't clean, if the dog was outside, if the dog was inside, if she looked a mess, if she looked too nice. There wasn't enough money in that world that could save her. The devil was burning from deep inside him. She told me that she'd been going to that church again. Every morning she'd sit in the back pew, and as soon as the clock struck 12, there they were, those church bells, chiming along. She watched as the church choir sang from the loft, practicing for that next service. Just like that day that was supposed to be the best day of her life. She folded her hands, closed her eyes, and a tear would fall down her cheek. "It's all going to be all right." I reached out and grabbed her hand. She stopped, took off the glasses, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Her eyes turned hard, dark. A fire filled them, burning out all emotion. "Oh, I know." She patted my hand, got up, and left. They say that next morning Jenny added a little extra flavoring to her husband's Tennessee whiskey. No one could confirm, but that didn't stop the rumors. I never believed them, but no lawman was able to find any evidence of foul play. How he died to this day is still a mystery. But I could see in her eyes a peacefulness. He was never going to hit another woman again. And there we were, in that little red brick church. I postponed my trip out east to be there. The church bells chimed that old familiar tune. I looked up at her, standing next to his coffin in a little black dress. But I couldn't approach her. She had chosen him. She married him. It didn't feel right. Next to her in line was Julian, someone else. He was their handyman of all sorts. I heard that despite Jenny, Ransom gave him access to all their money, leaving Jenny with no access. Jenny had had a crush on him since they both were in our high school play, The Foreigner. They played not lovers, but counter to each other. But I think Jenny had played her role Catherine like she loved Charlie, who Julian played. Any time after the show, she would gush at how great Julian was. I mean, he was a good actor, sure. On closing night, when he whispers into her ear to reveal that he isn't a foreigner who can actually speak English, sorry, spoilers, he brushed his lips against her neck. No one, I think, noticed. I noticed. I shook away the old memory from our past and found myself back at that church funeral. Miss Cranston just finished telling me about her granddaughter, Sarah, also going to law school. I smiled politely, and she wished me luck at school. I looked back up towards Jenny. There she mouthed the words of that hymn. Once again, her eyes were closed, her hands folded. I took a step back, intending to leave. She looked up and caught my eyes, again, finding me in the crowd. A smile crossed her lips. "It's all going to be all right." And the church bells chimed.